There's so many options. How do you pick which gun to buy?
Said he got a plug on the merch, send it through. Lately I've been looking at them prawns like they minuscule. Ooh, hold on, gotta see it through. I might hold a sword or the Drake. I got different views. We can't even go out on the walk. We got different shoes. Told you I was supposed to...
Welcome back. This is part 3 of So You Want to Buy Your First Gun. Today's video is all about a selection process for helping you make your final decision. Now, most of the criteria that we're going to go over today is geared towards handguns. However, many of them are applicable to long guns. So before we get into the video, like this video, comment your thoughts below, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video with your mama. Let's get into it. Okay, let's get into my favorite criteria to use when selecting a firearm, and arguably one of the most important, and that is the trigger. The trigger can really make or break a gun. So let's start off by talking about hammer fired versus striker fired pistols. Now, to show you and to give you a demonstration, I have two pistols with me, the VP9, which is by H&K, and the Walther PPKS. So let me show you that both of those are clear. We have the VP9 here, empty magazine, and an empty chamber. And we have the Walther PPKS. And you can see we have an empty magazine there and an empty chamber. So the VP9 is what is known as striker fired, which has no hammer here. Whereas the PPKS is hammer fired, which does have an external hammer. This portion right here that you see everyone pull back in movies. So let's get into the differences of those. Okay, let's discuss striker fired pistols first. So the VP9 here has an internal firing pin, which simply strikes the round each time you pull the trigger. Now, the thing about striker fired pistols is each trigger pull will be the same. They are remarkably consistent because they do not have a hammer that goes from double action to single action. We'll talk about that in a second. So with each trigger pull, you will have the same amount of slack being taken up. You will hit a very definitive wall. You break, and then you get a clean reset. And that's going to be the same every time you pull the trigger. Okay, let's talk about hammer fired pistols. Now, most hammer fired pistols like this one are going to be double action and then single action. And all that means is the first trigger pull is going to both cock the hammer and release it. And each subsequent trigger pull, the hammer will already be in the back position and it will just release the hammer, each subsequent trigger pull. Now, there's some pros and some cons to this. The first trigger pull is going to be much harder to pull the trigger, and it's going to be much longer than each subsequent trigger pull after that. So the con of that is with the additional weight that it takes to pull the trigger, you can pull the gun off target, right? So you have to train with that extensively. Now, a pro of having a longer trigger pull to begin with is it prevents snags. Since the trigger is so hard to pull, it prevents negligent discharges due to snagging the trigger on clothes or something as you pull it out of the holster or something like that. So just to give you a demonstration, the first trigger pull is going to both cock and release the hammer, and then each trigger pull thereafter, because if you were firing the gun, the slide would have went back. Each trigger pull thereafter starts with the hammer in the cocked position, which is a much lighter trigger pull, right? So I love these triggers in single action, but in double action for me, they're a bit annoying just because the trigger pull is so long that you can get off target. However, this is something that you'll have to decide for yourself, right? Like I mentioned, there are pros to striker fired pistols. There are pros to hammer fired pistols. And just to add an additional piece, hopefully not to confuse you, they do have hammer fired pistols which are single action only. That means they have consistent trigger pulls and the gun will only fire if you manually cock the hammer to the back to rear position. So that kind of depends on what you think that you may need in your life. I recommend that you try shooting both just to get a feel for them. If you are a little bit worried about safety, then maybe a hammer fire pistol is the right one for you, because that first trigger pull, when you pull that gun out, you will have to be very intentional to fire that first shot. There will be no accidents because the trigger pull is so much harder. If you want something more consistent, that's predictable, and you know it's gonna shoot the same way each and every time, then maybe a striker fire pistol is for you. Okay, the last piece about the trigger I wanna discuss is you want your triggers, at least I want my triggers in particular, with crisp, defined breaks and relatively short resets, and we'll go over what that is now. So, in terms of the VP9, this is striker fired. You have some slack here, a very definitive wall. I know exactly where that shot's gonna break. I can hold right there and then break. And then on the reset, it has a relatively short reset right there, and we're good to shoot again. So something that I don't like, or a trigger that I don't particularly like that much, is my LCP. And to show you that is clear, we have an empty magazine and we have an empty chamber. Now, why I'm not a big fan of this is the reset. So we have a pretty, I wouldn't say a very definitive wall, but I do know where the wall is. When we break, when we reset, we have almost a fake reset. So it comes up, first click, that wasn't a reset. Second click, that was the reset. And that is a much longer reset than I particularly like. Now, the reason why I don't like longer resets is because as the trigger is kicking itself back out, your hand has a tendency to move just that much more. So I would like a very crisp, definitive break and a short reset so my hand can move as little as possible and I can make sure that I stay on target. Okay, let's move on to sights. Now, there are plenty of options for sights. You have Glocks with their U-dot sights, Steyrs with their trapezoid, funky triangle sights. You have your typical 3-dot sights. You have tritium night sights, which also look like 3 dots, or you have even aftermarket sights like True Glow fiber optic sights. And we'll get into some of those now. All right, let's get into a few of the ones I just mentioned. So to give you some examples, I have a few of my guns with me here today, as you saw, and I'll just show you some of the different sights that they came with. Now, I'll start with some of my least favorite and move into my most favorite. Now, here's the Ruger LCP, which came with blacked out rear sights and a white dot in the front. Not a big fan of the blacked out rear sights. Here's my Walther PPKS, which is comes with a red dot in the back and a red dot in the front. Hopefully you guys can see that. Also, not a huge fan of those. Now, my VP9 is much more like your typical pistol with 3 dots. It has 2 dots in the back, 1 dot in the front on this front sight, and you line them up like that, 1, 2, 3, and the bullet will go right at the front dot. So here you can see I have 3 dots. Hopefully those are lined up on camera. And the cool thing about this VP9 is these are actually tritium night sights, so at nighttime they do glow kind of like a greenish color, and you can see exactly where those sights are should you need to use your gun at night. Or for me, what I like it is I just have them on a nightstand and the sights glow so I know exactly which way the gun is oriented and I can pick it up quickly if I need to. So that's the benefit of having night sights, and I would highly recommend do some research, pick a gun that already comes with night sights. It will save you a lot of trouble in the future. And last but not least, we have some aftermarket sights on my shield. I did not show you yet, but the shield is clear. We have an empty magazine and we have an empty chamber. And on this shield, I have tritium True Glow night sights, which I'm a big fan of. They're fiber optic. If you can see in the top, they have fiber optics running through them. And they pick up the light very well and they kind of glow. So in the daytime, they will pick up the sun shining down and they'll light up almost. And at night, they glow as well. So I'm a big fan of those. Now, last but not least, I'm gonna throw in something else. I would recommend you choose a pistol that is red dot ready, already has the optics cuts. Now a red dot is just simply like it sounds. You can throw a red dot on top of your pistol to just help you acquire your target that much easier. And if you don't get a pistol that is red dot ready and you want to get a red dot in the future, you will have to get that slide machined, and that will cost you considerably more money. So if you get a pistol that is red dot ready, like my FN Reflex, which is also clear, empty magazine, empty chamber, this particular gun you see has cutouts and screws at the top for a red dot. So I can just take this base plate off and I can mount a red dot at that point. So I highly recommend, my recommendation to you is get night sights standard on your pistol. They do make plenty of pistols with those. I like the 3-dot sights, and I would also highly recommend you get a pistol that is optics ready. You may not want to put a red dot on there, especially as a new shooter to begin with, but in the future, you just want to have that option. Okay, the next criteria is recoil. Now, as we know based on physics, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if you are firing a bullet that way, there's going to be a force coming back this way at you as well. And that's what causes the pistol to kind of flip up each round, right? And each round you have to put it back on target. Now, some guns have significantly greater recoil than others, and we'll get into that now. So the VP9 here, as the name implies, shoots a 9mm round. I also have my SIG P365, which I haven't showed you yet. It's clear, empty magazine, empty chamber. This shoots the same round as this, a 9mm. Now, before I tell you, which one do you think is going to recoil more? If you're like most folks, you said this will actually recoil more. Why? Because it's larger, and people have a tendency to believe larger guns are just harder to shoot. They recoil more. New shooters believe that, at least. But if you're a seasoned shooter, you know it's actually the opposite, right? This has less mass to keep it in place. So when you shoot the 9mm round in a smaller gun like this, it is going to move around more than if you shoot a 9mm round in a much larger, heavier handgun like this. And to give you an analogy, it's almost like if you were trying to run over somebody with a football. You were running a running back and you were going to try and run over somebody. It is significantly easier to run over someone who's, let's say, 5'3", 120 pounds than it is an offensive lineman who's 6'6", 320 pounds. It's way easier to run over the smaller person. Just like there's much more recoil pushing back on a smaller pistol than it would be on a much larger full-size handgun. So that is something to consider. Different guns handle recoil differently, especially when you look at their size. Also the caliber. So a 380 being a smaller round is going to cause the same size gun to recoil less than, let's say, a 40 or a 45, which is much larger caliber than a 380, is going to cause that same size gun to recoil significantly more. So all of these are things that you need to take into consideration, and I highly recommend whichever guns you're looking at, go rent and go shoot them so you can feel that recoil for yourself. Okay, the next category we're going to get into is ergonomics, and that is essentially how the gun feels in your hand and how it was designed. So I'll start off by showing you a few guns that I'm not a big fan of, and then I'll show you one that I am a huge fan of. My LCP. Not the biggest fan of this ergonomically because it's so small. Now there's nothing wrong with the gun itself. It was designed to be small. It was designed to be concealable and to be able to be carried in places where other larger guns can't be. The problem with it being so small is, one, it's very thin and I feel like I'm almost over gripping the gun. But two, the handle with it being shorter, I can't really get a good purchase with my pinky there to hold the gun effectively. So it does take a little bit of adjusting to shoot it properly. Also, my Smith & Wesson Shield, I was not the biggest fan of this because it was also so thin and I felt like I was over gripping the gun. But what I did to mitigate that situation is I actually put a whole grip on there, which is that rubber grip. I'm not sure if you can see it, but it just widens the grip and gives me something to hold which is a little bit less slippery. Now the last thing, the gun that I love ergonomically, my VP9. Now I made a whole video on this gun. I'll link it now and you can check out why I love this gun in every aspect. But in terms of ergonomics, the big thing about this gun is it has 3 interchangeable side straps here, 3 interchangeable back straps here, and 3 interchangeable side straps on the other side. So that gives you a total of 27 different combinations for you to customize and configure this gun directly to your hand. So you have to find what works for you ergonomically. I suggest you try a few guns out. Look for guns with interchangeable back straps and side straps, which will give you different configuration options, and then go shoot and test them out yourself. Okay, next up is capacity. And capacity, there's 2 things that are important with capacity, and that is the caliber that you choose as well as the manufacturer you choose. So for instance, if you have a smaller caliber bullet, which is physically smaller, you can fit more bullets in the same amount of space than you could a larger caliber round. So just to be extreme, if you had 22s, you could fit way more 22s in the same space than you could a larger 45 caliber round. So that is something you have to consider when you're choosing your handguns. What caliber do you want to go to? Because that will impact the capacity. The second thing that will impact the capacity is the manufacturer. So for instance, the Glock 19, one of the most renowned carry guns ever made. People love the Glock 19. Now its standard capacity is 15 rounds. However, nowadays with our modern advances, companies like SIG make the P365X Macro, which holds 17 rounds, but is smaller than the Glock 19, which only holds 15 rounds. So if capacity means a lot to you, that's a big pro in the category for SIG. So you have to determine yourself how important is capacity to you. That should help you determine what caliber you want to choose as well as what manufacturer you want to go with. Okay, next category up will be brief, and that is aesthetics. My girlfriend, she's a big proponent. The gun has to look cute if she was going to carry the gun or she's going to have the gun. For me, I also think aesthetics is important. The gun's got to look cool. And to give you a couple examples of guns I think look cool, may not be the best guns, but they certainly look cool, is my Walther PPKS here with that stainless steel and those wood grips, looks beautiful. And my FN Reflex in this flat dark earth also looks dope. So depends on how important that is to you, but aesthetics is a category that you can judge the firearm by as well. All right, the next category is recoils. This is simple. Just do some research on whether or not the particular firearm you have had any recalls in the past and if they've corrected them in the newer models. Also, another category is holsters and accessories. I put these in the same category, holsters and accessories. And that is just how many holsters are readily available for the firearm you want to get and how many accessories can you put on the particular firearm. So if you're like a Glock fan, there's a million different holsters, accessories for the Glock. So that might persuade you to purchase one. Now, if that's not as big of a deal to you, you can go with something like a SIG P365, which there's plenty of accessories and holsters for as well. But you'll notice this particular SIG P365 has a proprietary rail system as opposed to a Picatinny rail system here on the VP9, which allowed me to mount this TLR1 HL Streamlight light. So that's something that you want to consider, is what rail systems are on the front of the pistol, what holster availability is there now without getting one custom designed, and last but not least, is it optics ready? Okay, I threw a lot of categories at you. Now, if you want to make an effective decision in an objective way, you can always chart this out, give each category a score, and then come up with a total and rank your guns that way. Obviously, you want to shoot them first so you can effectively rank each category, but here's what something like that might look like. So you see for guns A, B, and C, we have ranked each category and given it a total at the bottom. So that's just something you can do for yourself to determine which gun is going to be your final decision. Okay, that concludes part 3 of So You Want to Buy Your First Gun. That should have given you plenty to think about during your selection process. Hopefully that helps. If you found this video helpful, make sure you like the video, comment your thoughts below, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. We're not done yet. Part 4 coming soon.